conflict. We all deal with it. But how do we go from overwhelm to actually productive and building strong relationships? And that's what we're going to be discussing today.
Welcome to Fordify Live with your host, Ford Saeks.
Now, in this episode, we're going to dive deep into how you go from being overwhelmed to how do you become a conflict converter. Our guest today is Nat Trodahl. You can check her out online at NatTrodhal. Now, Nat comes to us. She's actually someone I've hired to help me reduce my conflict in my career and in my personal life. So, Nat, welcome to the show. Share with our listeners, how did you become a conflict converter?
Hey, Ford, it's good to see you. Thank you first and foremost for having me on the show. I am a huge fan. This work is extremely personal to me. I have spent a large part of my life and my career in law enforcement agencies and social services, so environments where things can escalate fast. And I had a lot of de-escalation training, and it's great in theory, but it didn't work for me. Not because those techniques are bad, but really because I was coming into all of the situations already emotionally reactive. And so if I fast forward into 2017, I had a complete breakdown. On paper, I had built a lot of success, but my reality didn't match that. I was drowning in debt. My relationship was really on the rocks. My family couldn't stand me, and the people that I worked with they compared me to the mother in Mommy Dearest.
Mommy Dearest with the hangers.
Yes, no more wire hangers. That was me. And the funny thing about breakdowns is that they often lead to breakthroughs. And someone handed me a book that changed my life, and that book is called Connecting Paradigms. It's by Matthew Bennett, and in that book, I learned about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. A lot of times we just think about the first two, fight and flight, but there are actually 4 survival responses. I also learned that people that grew up with childhood adversity, that their amygdala is actually enlarged. So it gets activated much quicker. And our amygdala, of course, is like that smoke detector. It's constantly searching for danger, right? And so when it detects it, it sounds the alarm, danger, danger. And then we have one of our default modes of those 4 types, and we jump into those. So I learned that. And then most importantly, I learned that I could actually rewire my brain. I learned that I could self-regulate, and that all of that internal conflict and the external conflict that I was battling, I could transform it if I could learn to de-escalate myself first. And so that's what I do now. It actually led me on a path where I started chanting with Buddhist monks at the local Zen center of Las Vegas. And that really is what I do now. I help people manage conflict because it's not about controlling others. It starts with us, Ford.
You know that most people don't have those tools in their toolbox. I grew up definitely traumatized, and for those episodes, people can go back and listen to previous episodes to find out what's happened to me in my life. But I believe, forget the mistake, learn the lesson. And so I'm seriously curious, because I know you work with organizations right now. I know you do keynotes and workshops and breakouts, and I know you work with executives and their leadership teams to help them navigate these waters. Where would you say is where people start? Now, one clarification. I want to jump back to the part you said. The more traumatized you are, the bigger that area of the brain grows. Is that what you said?
Yes. Yeah. They've found it in studies now in brain scans that the amygdala, that part of our brain, it's the smoke detector, if you will. It's scanning for danger constantly. And as soon as it detects it, it sends an alert to the rest of our brain and body that says danger, danger. And then we jump into one of those 4 survival responses that we learn from childhood, from our experiences, from different interactions. And we all actually have a default mode. We might do all 4, but typically we are leaning into one. And for me, for example, it was fight. I was very aggressive and assertive, and that just didn't always work in relationships.
For me, Nat, it was always, it was always fight. I don't think it was ever flight. I think that my defense mechanism was to fight verbally, mentally. When you talk about mental gymnastics, I'm an Olympian, right? I can manipulate better than the best, and that's not something I'm proud of. That's something I learned years ago, and I had to really learn how to be empathetic and genuine and be in the moment, and learn those skills from people like you that have helped me over the years. And what I would say though, when I took my personality profile test years ago, it actually said Ford believes in win-win. If he can't get win-win, he's totally fine with win-lose. And I was like, I read that and I'm like, well, I'm not really proud of that. And so, I'm sure our listeners and our viewers can appreciate the fight or flight, because everybody deals with that. And even the ones that don't, you can always better your best. So this episode is for those that are either dealing with it or that it might be themselves, but we all deal with it on some level. So take me through, where do you start with someone now you've given them some other options? And I don't know even how I would use any other option other than fight or flight.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the important part. You have to have a system that you can rely on, so that whether it's you in that conflict state or someone else, how to navigate. And I actually teach a 3-step framework. It's called evaluate, de-escalate, and navigate. And as with anything, the more you use it, the more automatic it will become. But essentially, the evaluate is to evaluate what is happening for you. So essentially your triggers, because like I mentioned, we're all going to jump into one of those 4 survival responses. And the more you can pay attention to what's happening to you, you can start to prepare for it. So you get to be almost like a crime scene investigator, but instead of looking for, footprints and bloodstains on the wall, you're going to examine your body. You're going to evaluate what's happening. For example, you might notice that you're holding your breath, or your hands are a little shaky, or you've got clenched fists, or your shoulders are tensing up. Those are telltale signs. And it's our body giving us clues that something is happening. And so that's what I like to say, is that when conflicts arise, it's not that we should be ignoring it or ignoring our emotions. It's that we should use that conflict as an opportunity and to transform it into something useful. So once you evaluate what's going on, your triggers, then you can go into step 2, which is to de-escalate. And that means really taking it down a notch for yourself. One of the biggest...
I've had a lot of people tell me to take it down a notch, so I don't know. It's kind of like if I tell my wife to calm down. Okay, not something I would recommend everybody. So let's say I'm breathing and I'm feeling it, and now I know I need to de-escalate, and I'm fine to take it down a notch because I get told that I just have to come down a few more notches. So now, how do I take it down a notch? Like if I'm feeling I have to protect myself and I've got momentum and it's a freight train going forward, how do I put the brakes on and de-escalate it?
Yes. The quickest way is to take a breath. So I know that we talk about, and that's also the key. You hit it kind of on the head. It's not enough for us to tell somebody else, hey, you need to cool it for a minute, or for someone to tell us that. It's not going to work, right?
You mean I'm not supposed to say, you are here and I need you to be here? That doesn't work, right?
That's not going to work. It's going to send us more into panic mode. So our breath is the fastest way. And with anything, I have a whole other set of toolbox to get us there quicker. It's going to be a practice. But in the moments, once you've identified that you are triggered, here are a couple of things you could do. So if taking a breath is not going to give you enough of a buffer of space to really calm the situation down, you might actually need to call a timeout and leave the room. The problem is that we see a problem with that. We have an issue when we don't make it a regular tool that we reach for, to say, you know what, things are getting a little out of hand. Let's all take a 5-minute break, get out of the room, go grab some water, and then we'll regroup. And it might be heated enough to where it might need to be a couple of hours or maybe the next day. You can judge that. But what happens is that we get so wrapped up in our response that we don't do that. And so the more we can practice reaching for that tool of saying, hey, just need a timeout. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's just getting out of hand. This isn't productive. The more we reach for those tools, the better we become at it. It's when we don't know to reach for those tools, we don't know what to do, that we just kind of dig our heels in. And then I'm sure you've been there as well, where people just shut down, and then it's no longer an effective meeting.
Well, yeah, keep going. You're good.
So breathing is one of them. One of the other ones that's my favorite is what I call big deal, little deal. And I'll tell you a quick story. This is actually pretty funny. So I have a son now, and he's almost 5, but at the time he was 2. And every Saturday morning we like to make pancakes together. Well, there was one Saturday morning, there was a lot of stuff going on in my life, and I was a little bit stressed out. And so that Saturday morning, we have all our ingredients out. We have our retro, like 1970s KitchenAid mixer on the counter that we got from his great grandma. His name is Sullivan. And we've got all of our ingredients mixed. All we need are the eggs. I crack an egg in. Sullivan cracks an egg in, and I grab the shells. And as I turn to go throw them away into the garbage can, Sullivan flips on the mixer full speed. There's batter flying everywhere. It's in his hair, on his shirt. It's like splattering on the floor. And I say to him, Sullivan, you have to wait for mommy. Losing my patience. Yes, losing my patience. And he froze. I startled him. But I'm frustrated. I'm like marching over to get the paper towels to clean up the mess and, that he made. And we're talking about a child here. So again, these reactions are normal regardless of who we're dealing with. And Ford, I kid you not, as I'm cleaning up the mess, Sullivan looks up at me and he says, Mommy, is this a big deal or a little deal? And I had taught him big deal, little deal to help him manage his emotions, as well as my own in those difficult situations. Like if he spilled his milk, it wasn't the end of the world. But here he was recognizing, so easy a toddler could do it, right? Recognizing that I was flying off the handle. So big deal, little deal is something that after that moment, I started using with a lot of the executives that I work with. And it helps. They either say it internally to themselves or they actually verbalize it out loud. And that allows you to then move to step number 3, which is to navigate. Okay. Once you know the severity of the situation, go ahead.
No, just we're doing great. I'm thinking big deal, little deal. This is a little deal. Let's keep going. Let's keep giving the steps.
Yeah.
So I'm breathing, I'm evaluating, I'm de-escalating, I'm making a break, and now I'm running a pattern of, is this a big deal or little deal? Keep going.
Correct. And the cool thing about big deal, little deal, which I've already said, a 2-year-old can do it, so I can do it and you can do it, is that by asking that question, it forces us automatically to get out of our emotional brain and into our prefrontal cortex or our thinking brain, because we're asking questions and now our brain's like, oh, I have to think about something. Is this a big deal or a little deal? I have to assess it. Only my thinking brain can do that. And so it's a little trick that you play because you don't have to, I am now moving from emotional to thinking. It does it for you. And so once you assess little deal, big deal, then the third step is to navigate. Now with the information that you have, now having calmed down a little bit, now you can take the next step. Look, if it's a little deal, you grab the paper towels and you clean up the mess, right? Or you call a meeting or whatever the case is. If it's a big deal, right? We're extremely over budget. We've got to, crunch some numbers. Now you know that the next step is you can think about it more critically. You can make the next best decision because you've now evaluated, de-escalated, and you're navigating into the best decision forward for the situation that matches what just happened. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. So I know our listeners, again, this audio becomes the Business Growth Show podcast. And of course, the video is the live feed we are on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and a few other places. So we have this process and we know that, success starts with us. You have to clean up your own backyard before you worry about the neighborhood. So I get it. So now I've got a process. But what do you do when you're a team member or a leader and you're in a situation where the other person hasn't necessarily, they're not reading off the same sheet of music. They don't have the rules and the 4 steps to de-escalate. What does a leader do or what does an employee do to help de-escalate instead of elevate?
Yes, fantastic question. This is why I believe in this so much and why this is huge for me. We have to start with managing ourselves first because that's going to change our approach. So in that case, I'm doing the work. I've got this 3-step framework from Nat Trodahl, right? The de-escalate yourself first framework. But now my team is presenting conflict either with me or with each other. So what do I do? The first thing is not to see conflict as a problem, which we already talked about. Okay, the key is to take that conflict, notice that it's telling us something, it's information, it's data, and we want to transform it into something more useful. So once we're able to now handle how we come into a situation, it makes it easier to address that employer, the conflict. So I'll give you an example. I worked with a woman who is a clinical operations director at a medical clinic. And she
Oh, you
had an
mean
employee.
Sandy? You told me about her. No, I'm just kidding, everybody. For the purposes of this episode, this is for educational, informational purposes only. These stories are told to make an impact. We're not talking about any individual. Okay, so take me back to this, to what happened with Sandy.
Sure. So she has a new employee working for her, and this young man, as she called him, it was constantly late. We're not talking a few minutes late. We're talking like 15, 20 minutes late on a regular basis. And her struggle was that she was really worried about how to address something as simple as just great tardiness. I mean, that's a basic workplace etiquette. Like, you're expected to show up on time when your shift starts. What's the problem? But she had some internal conflict. And then that was going to create external conflict because she didn't know how he was going to react. And she also felt bad about his story and all of these things that she was having conflict with. So when she could learn to de-escalate what was happening for her, she instead could approach it from a different space. So instead of approaching it and saying, hey, Johnny, why are you always late? What's wrong with you? Don't you know you're supposed to be here on time? I pay you to be here on time. Her response shifted from something like, hey, do we need to adjust your schedule? Can you help me understand why you're having a hard time getting here on time? And that subtlety and just the way she was approaching him, because she could de-escalate herself, changed the conversation from her finding out that he was just taking public transportation to and from work. He didn't have a vehicle. And so that extra, they ended up changing his schedule from like 9 a.m. to 9:30.
Right.
But that extra 30 minutes of time now allowed him to get to work. If she had just approached him with, you're lazy, you're irresponsible, why can't you just do what I pay you to do and be here on time? How do you think he would have reacted, Ford?
Yeah, I mean, he probably would have either quit, because people don't leave companies, they leave their bosses, and he probably would have felt undervalued and unappreciated.
Yep. And it happens all the time. And that's just a small example. But I like to say that, I mean, conflict at the end of the day, in its most basic form, is just not seeing eye to eye. And it happens as regularly as like two friends arguing over a game, or siblings fighting over the last slice of pizza. And in workplace settings where we spend the majority of our lives, it just manifests differently. It looks like miscommunication. It looks like people having conflict because of different work styles. One person's more go with the flow, but the other needs to know every single detail of the project before they can get started. Unclear priorities or goals. We miss that a lot. We think that because we say jump, our team knows, how high and for how long. And those are just little things, but all of that creates conflict. And then on top of that, you pile stress and pressure. I mean, we talk about work-life balance, but stress and pressure, whether you work here or across the street, is going to follow you. And for a lot of people that listen to this show, right, they're wanting to grow their business, they're entrepreneurs, we're high achievers, we're ambitious. A lot of times we put ourselves in stressful situations, and sometimes we thrive better under pressure. But the key is knowing how to manage that. And a lot of times we place those expectations on our team members too, that they don't work like us or they don't work as hard as us, versus just like taking a step back for ourselves and really asking better questions that don't come in so hot and heavy, or doing the opposite and you just avoid it and pretend that everything is fine with your team when really it's not.
Yeah, I think that, I've done a lot of work in personal growth, not only for myself, but for the organizations I work with. And, a lot of organizations will use DISC profiles or work strengths or emotional intelligence. They use these as tools to try to identify the styles of it. And I think that there's two things. I think it's the generation, what was going on when they were growing up, affected how they think and how they make decisions, what the rules mean. And then, of course, their style, right? So whether they come from a really strong style, maybe they're dominant and their intent is to get it done, or maybe they feel like it's all about social connections and people, so they want to socialize and have fun, or maybe they just don't want any conflict at all. They just want to get along, or maybe they want to get it right. So you have get it done, have fun, get along, and get it right. And I know for me, when I work with employees and teams, and even like a pre-event call with executives before I do a keynote, I'm going to evaluate the choice of words that they use, the rate of speech, because people will tell you what's important to them if you listen. If you really listen, you can identify it. Because some people say, well, I don't know which approach to take. Well, it's not just a cookie cutter approach like you're sharing. It's more, you have to have the modality. And I think that, I always tell my listeners, you got to be open-minded, coachable, and a critical thinker. Take the ideas that we're sharing on our episodes and, certainly in your keynote presentations, and adapt them to how you work. but success leaves clues. There's ways out there to do it. And so if you're sitting in a relationship, either personally or professionally, and you feel like, gee, there's got to be a better way, I would absolutely have you connect with Nat Online. Again, Nat Trodahl. It's NATTRODAHL. She's on LinkedIn. You can find her. She's got a great podcast and episodes that she puts out too. What else, if you were to give our listeners something else that you're working on? Like, what do you see going on with the future between AI and people, the human touch and high tech, and just how are they going to navigate? Now you've got the people that are desocialized, and now we're adding technology on it. I just think there's going to be even more conflict going forward.
Yes. Yeah. I'm part of a couple of local business groups. And it's funny you mentioned this because there's a particular group out here, and they own a window cleaning business, and they also do some driving on the side, like, rideshare driving, things like that. So like Uber, Lyft, and they can't wait to be able to purchase like the self-driving cars so that they can just like send out their vehicle to pick up this person, but then they're making money without having to physically be there. And they've also talked about like the humanoid. So they're super like thinking fast forward, futuristic. They're going to get this humanoid to come in and like clean their windows and do the labor part of it. And that's all well and good. And it might be the case for some organizations where you can have all robots, or whatever really is going to happen here in the very near future if we're being realistic. But the reality is that there's still going to be jobs that require people, and those I think are going to be the most important jobs. At the end of the day, all we have are relationships. And so if we don't invest in being able to keep that human touch and the human connection, we're going to struggle and we're going to fail. One of the myths about emotional intelligence, if you will, is that somehow they have to be nice. It's not about being nice. It's about being able to set boundaries and have the hard conversations, which is why I love this topic of conflict, because we just aren't having the tough conversations. And we have to, because the reality is there are going to be jobs that still require people, and we need to be able to work with those people and motivate them and encourage them, and even just have the tough conversations of like, look, these are the expectations I have for you, and if you can't meet them, then you might need to move on and not be here. But some people aren't even having those conversations. Some leaders struggle with having the tough conversations of you're not meeting performance metrics. Instead, we just continue to cultivate this low performing culture. And so whether you're avoiding it or whether you're overreacting to it, the culture is being set, and it's being set whether you're a part of it or not. So if people are thinking that the AI is going to make these people problems go away, it's not. It's going to make it even more crucial that we know how to connect.
Yeah, I think you're so right. I think the biggest problem people have in the future is knowing what's real, what's not. And I think they're going to really crave. I think the pendulum is swinging high tech, but I think the organizations that want to really build long-lasting relationships and customer experiences are going to learn that human connection. And so, again, obviously you can automate certain processes of your business, but you don't want to replace the human touch with the relationship part. So any final thoughts you have for our listeners for today's episode, that where can they learn more about you, or do you have anything new coming up?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think one of the things I definitely want to mention, because I talked a lot about in the beginning of childhood adversity and talked on trauma and how that impacts you, right? And so for somebody that might be listening to this and thinking, I grew up in a totally normal environment, like that's not my story, I don't have that. My heart is genuinely happy for you, and that's fantastic. However, you're still human, and you'll still have the survival responses in your own ways. But more so than that, about 2/3 of the people in the workforce right now do come from that background. And so if it's not you, it is somebody that you work with or will work for you. And so being able to use this technique is going to help you navigate that, because again, it's not about the other person and controlling them and making them think it's their problem. It's up to us to manage ourselves. It really starts with us first. And I talk a lot more about this in my upcoming book, and I dive into the science a little bit more on how it really affects us. But then I also unpack the 4 types of, I think Ford, you said you are familiar with, Fawn, which is really just that people pleasing personality type.
Oh,
where,
that's why I wasn't affected. It was you lost me at people pleasing. Okay, got it.
And that has its downfalls as well. You might end up taking on too much because you don't want to make other people feel a certain way, or what have you.
Human doormat, right? Because you take on everything because you don't want conflict.
Exactly right. So my book is called Conflict to Collaboration, How De-escalating Yourself First Creates Better Teams. And so I have that coming up this spring, and I unpack all of those different types, and I give specific tools and strategies and even just new words and phrases that you can use to disarm yourself and your team, to really focus on the actual problems and not the people, and be able to move your business forward.
Well, I've already got my advanced copy in ordered, so I recommend if you want to de-escalate and be a conflict converter yourself and learn how to transform from overwhelm to a conflict, converter to a master, definitely want to be there. Nat, thanks so much for being on today's episode.
Hey, thanks, Ford. Good to see you.
Thank you for tuning in to Fordify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.